welcome back to The Big Story. This evening we're looking at accountants who apparently sent home on suspension to pave way for a lifestyle audit that has since not happened. We reported today in the Standard newspaper that we have a good number of them who are still on suspension on full pay, and that has raised a little bit of concern. And that is not the only concern that Kenyans have, because the question then is, what happened to the lifestyle audit that the president said was going to happen? What is the final outcome of it? Is this government even serious in fighting corruption in the first place? We're having this conversation with Professor George Wajakoya, who's a lawyer. We also have Engineer Chris Owanda, Chair, Kenya Institute of Supplies Management. Professor, just before we took the break, the engineer just mentioned that we've seen people being hauled to court, and a good number of them are not even the individuals who are sent home on suspension. So basically, fingers are being pointed at the wrong direction. And that brings me to the question that I've been thinking about. The last couple of months have seen several individuals taken to EACC, going to record statements at CID, and there's this, at some point there was this renewed hope on the fight against corruption. Do you see that, looking at the reporting that we had today in the Standard?
I think, thank you very much, Linda. As I said before, the country and the leadership have become chaotic. For them to drive attention from the ongoing problem of corruption, like it started when Kinoti was doing a vibrant job by actually bringing in ministers and questioning them, the government's legacy now has turned into divisionary tactics by deviating the attention. For example, recently they arrested 75 employees, low-level employees in the KRA, and these people were arrested and hauled in court without charges. And then what happened, of course, those were Friday arrests, were that the KRA system had to change the code of conduct while these people had been arrested. And now it's so much chaotic and we do not know the direction forward. Secondly, Kinoti was given the nod to do a good job. He did a good job. But what happened? Divisionary politics came in, tribalism came in, and now all that you see is targeting people, and procedurally. The law requires procedural propriety. When you want to arrest somebody, there must be a reason. You must tell these people why you are arresting him. But what has happened is now the security system is now being used by the government to arrest people, to tell the world that we are fighting corruption. Yet the main beneficiaries of corruption are driving big SUVs on the road and abusing the whole system. So the whole system actually fails to make any reasonable kind of. Like now, if you look at the accountants who are arrested, we had the lie detectors that were brought in the country, and these people are subjected to recklessness. People had anxiety, their families were subjected to emotional stress. So the whole thing is chaotic. We don't, and I support the engineer there for what he has just said. We have a problem in this country, and the only way we can come out of this problem is by probably telling the president to step down, to have a new kind of order.
But Prof, wouldn't it have made a difference if at all this lifestyle audit had actually been conducted and there were final results? Someone comes and says, we did a lifestyle audit on these individuals, this is what we found, these are the individuals who will still go back to work, these are the individuals we are taking to court. Would it have made a difference?
How do you legitimize an illegality? Which law did the president use to subject these people to lifestyle audit? Show me anywhere in the Constitution or any legislation that Parliament has passed to predestinate lifestyle audits. This was just some kind of fussy, sideways street talk in that we're going to do whatever you're going to do. It was not anchored on any law. And therefore, whatever was happening was an illegality. And that's why if somebody or a taxpayer wanted to bring this to test the legitimacy of that policy, which failed, then the courts would have been seized of the matter. And that's why I have never seen any one of them being arraigned before the court, because the system is actually converting an illegality into legality.
So, Prof, what you're telling Kenyans is that this lifestyle audit was not going to happen, is not going to happen, will never happen?
Yes.
Okay. Engineer, Just before we took that break, you had mentioned that the individuals who've been arrested, the individuals who've been questioned, have nothing to do with your members, and I know a good number of them as well, in terms of their profession. So then that brings to question that, do you feel that your members and the other individuals who are suspended are being blamed unfairly for the corruption that we're seeing in the country? And if indeed that is the case, what is the way forward from where you sit in fighting corruption in the country? Does it matter that we have new individuals at EACC and the DPP's office? Does it matter that now the president has been uttering very stern concerns about the fight against corruption? From where you sit and the experience that you have, what is the way forward? Clearly, this lifestyle audit is not happening.
Linda, we had given very, very qualified support to this directive from the executive when it was declared, on the condition that the executive had undertaken to do a very thorough review and audit of everybody in the procurement chain, because the procurement process is not just the procurement people and the finance people. It is the whole host of users, suppliers, accounting officers, all those who are involved in the entire process. But the executive indicated in the letter that was issued that these are the first two categories who were being targeted for this process. And we said, if this is going to be done across the board, then the government stands a good chance of pinpointing where the problems do lie. Because we do know and we do believe that the bulk of the members of the supplies practitioners community are actually hardworking Kenyans who live by what they earn. And if you follow them, you will actually see that they are struggling like everybody else. Now, that does not mean there are not a few who are rotten apples. We'll be lying to ourselves if we say that that was not the case. But we do not condone that. We also do not believe in the Kenyan supplies management that it is got to do with follow-up of individuals. It must be a whole institutional change, a whole institutional framework set up that allows the procurement process to be done in an orderly manner. We had the first procurement law promulgated in 2005, which was reviewed in 2015. And over that period, we have seen a lot of improvement in the way the procurement process is undertaken in this country with great accountability. Now, if we progress on that path, we are sure that there's going to be continuous improvement. And the more tighter you make the procurement legal framework, the harder it becomes to actually corrupt the system. And that's what we are shooting for. Right now, one big gap that we have there is that although we've got the law, the regulations that enable us to operationalize that 2015 Procurement Act are not yet in place. So our members are sort of shooting in the dark using a new law, old regulations, and that can catch them off guard. What we are saying is that, in my view, I do not quite agree with the very stand taken by Professor that we are almost running rogue. In my view, there is a very systematic approach at addressing the issues that we have. And for me, the beauty of this systematic approach that we have at the moment is that it takes away the limelight from my members, the procurement community, who previously were the target of everybody. Now the country knows our corruption problems actually lie elsewhere. And it's a good thing that then we actually start addressing them. Because if you heard even Opio Wandai at the beginning, Honorable, was actually saying, oh, we know the heart of corruption in this country is procurement. It's very wrong. There is a chief who steals chicken in the village. That's not procuring chicken from the villagers. There is land that is being corrupted. That's not procurement. So all these sweeping statements need to be put aside. And us in the procurement community, from the procurement policy, from the procurement regulations, from the practitioners, we have, in my view, set up a mechanism over the last 15 years that is putting in place a process that ensures that the bulk of the money that we dedicate to procurement in this country, which is now over 1.5 trillion, is actually being properly spent. We do hear blips And those are serious blips, that billions of shillings are misdiverted, they are not well spent. But what we do not often hear, and this is the missing story in the procurement part of this country, over 1.5 trillion shillings yearly are spent properly and correctly, and they're delivering services. We couldn't be having growth in this country of 6 point something percent in our GDP if we actually didn't have any commerce, any procurement taking place. The other missing part in this story is actually the role of private sector. We cannot forego the part that's played by the private sector, because in the linkages of money movement in corruption, the source of that money is the private sector. So we need also to ensure that we look outside the government and everybody becomes accountable. So we bring on board all the key stakeholders, KEPSA, CAM, the Association of Professionals in this country and in Eastern Africa, so that together with the citizenry, we actually work with the parliamentarians to put in place mechanisms and processes. Depending on individuals, depending on the president alone and his goodwill, can only take us that far. What will take us long term, which will deliver this country on the long term, is to ensure that we have got processes, we've got systems, and we've got laws that we are prepared to obey and implement. That's the only way we are going to emerge going forward. Somebody mentioned earlier on about the IFMIS. IFMIS is broken, etc. IFMIS is a good tool, and it takes a while to implement a good tool like IFMIS over a big system like the public finance management in this country. And it's going to be a step-by-step incremental. We realize our failings, we build on them. We realize our failings, we build on them. We learn from countries like Rwanda, which have done it quite well, and we build on it. So let's not be in the mood of throwing all the stones at everything that the government does. Let's correct the government, let's put them on a good footing, but at the same time, let's build on our learning and pronouncing very clearly and firmly that corruption is not good for this country, and we need to support the president as he fights that corruption led from the front.
I like the fact that you're saying we need to support the president in the fight against corruption. I remember the president very clearly at State House one day, and he basically asked, "Munataka nifanye nini?" So, Professor, this is where you come in. Engineer says there may be a few rotten individuals in their profession, but that is definitely not where the problem is. I was speaking to you earlier, and you're saying this lifestyle audit is not going to happen. It's not backed by any law. So when you look at that, plus the fact that we have reported that you have people who've been taking home salaries for a year, you have a president who's been talking about corruption year in, year out, you have animated, dramatic arrests that we've seen in the last couple of months that have not yielded anything. What goes through your mind in terms of the goodwill that the president now has in the fight against corruption in the country?
The president is just doing cosmetic surgery, if I may say. He's a weak president, and he needs to be told, I'm a taxpayer in this country, I've locust standi to speak my rights and my mind, and if the president himself has accepted impliedly that sasa nifanye nini, that means he should relinquish and go away. The president has failed to tame corruption. He started off well recently by appointing Kinoti and Haji. And the two gentlemen did a very tremendous work. And I have also to support the National Security Intelligence for having beefed up information about corruption to the two entities. But what happened? The first time Kinoti did a wonderful job, and Haji did a wonderful job. Then the cartels came in. You remember the petroleum issue? Minister in charge of petroleum or energy never issued any statement. You remember the dam issue? The president never took any action, whereas Kinoti did this investigation to continue it to conclusion. Ministers were called to the DCI to be held accountable, and good news were being announced that in 2-3 weeks we shall see good news.
Yeah, heads will roll.
Yeah, that died. Now we have seen what is happening today of kutangatanga na kuwika groups who have come in as if there is nothing very important. I mean, let's not lie, talking nice English because we are professionals, and lying 40 million Kenyans who are actually dying as scavengers. Let us tell the president the truth. He has failed, and it's time for him to go. We are not going to listen to very good speeches, especially and particularly like the one you had. We listen to those speeches every year. There are some people in State House who are very good speech writers, and the president will come and say, we have unemployment in the country, we have the youth who have finished university, yet the Jubilee Manifesto itself at the inception was, how many jobs in the first 1 year? What has happened? If you look at the Agenda 4, the Agenda 4 is not a prerogative of the president. That should be the prerogative of the private sector, and let people actually be empowered by themselves by going into entrepreneurship. When it comes to employment or unemployment, let us borrow a leaf from countries that have been a success. If you go to the Southeast Asia, and particularly India, for example, India has got a curriculum system that actually looks into and encourages young men to come up into private sector to take up entrepreneurship. And they are actually given incentives on what to do. But here, our system is, oh, let's wait. We shall give you jobs. Population is increasing. The level of poverty is going up. Politicians are now coming. They have now taken over common sense. And the president is sitting, and he has the power and the authority. He has, if he got people like Matiang'i, Director of Intelligence, Director of CID and the DPP, and gave them full mandate, this country will be turned upside down. That we don't come here to tell stories about how good it's going, and let's not. We have, this is nonsense. We have had this time and again, and this is what we call the Cyric defeat theory, doing the same thing over and over for how many years? I don't agree, and I will never agree until we see changes. And if the president is not fit to continue, let him step aside, and let's have the country going on with some other people. We have men and women in this country who are capable. We are tired of stories. But at the same time, I would also like to say that as a Kenyan, I have a duty to support the president if he can listen to me. I have a duty, so are others, plus the engineer, to tell the president where he's going wrong, instead of coming to put blue band on his face as if we are looking for employment. I am not looking for employment. I am looking for a way of assisting the president. He has a good will, but what about those who are following him? They are the people who have let the president of this country down. Okay. They are now singing and wigging and stealing the same money and taking them to the churches. And the churches also at the same time have become paranoias. Thank you.
Engineer, you get the final word. What is the way forward for President of the Republic of Kenya in the fight against corruption?
I think where I can agree with Professor is that the president needs to wield a much more firm hand.
You don't think he's doing that enough?
I think the president is doing some of it, but he can achieve a lot more with more firmness in follow-up of some of the decisions that he has actually made. He's made very bold decisions that are acknowledged as really earth-shaking decisions, but he needs to consistently follow them through and ensure that the whole mass of the executive that governs with him are actually following through. Now, where I could again build on Professor Jakoya's the point of view is that as professionals, we actually shouldn't do the talking only. We should in any way make sure we've developed an input mechanism that enables the government to function, so that it's not just stories we tell the government. I've just given you an illustration of what in the supplies community, what has been done over the past 15 years, where a professor is old enough, he can remember what was happening 20 years ago, 25 years ago. You couldn't have these systems that tell you where all the theft is taking place, so that you point out an audit and an investigation in a particular area. That has come about because the men and women of this country who work in the finance sector, in the procurement sector, have actually dedicated to develop systems. When there's a window of support and opportunity from the government, push that envelope, make it bigger, so that whoever comes, he finds there are systems in place. It's difficult to maneuver around them. Yes, there are cartels, we don't deny that, but make the life of the cartels tougher and harder. And that's where the professionals come in. Professionals are not politicians. They can cross over and become politicians, but when they are wearing the hat of professionals, then they need to support the county governments, the central government, in ensuring that systems and processes are put in place, like we have done in the procurement community. That's why today, Linda, I can confidently say as the chairman that the bulk of corruption in this country is not in the procurement office. It is actually around the procurement office by users, by other people, and they tended to blame and point the finger. But now the law and the infrastructure makes it very clear. Let's audit and look at where the money is getting lost. That's why if you look at the Friday list, you will see very few of my members there. And if there is any, it's the junior officers. Now, the message to the president for me as the chairman of KISM is that those, my members, who are still at home, it is actually very unfair to them to keep them at home. If the executive has got any evidence against them, they should take them to court, they should actually charge them, and they should stop paying them salaries. But as long as you are not prepared to share that evidence that you collected, it's grossly unfair, not only for those members, but for their families and their friends, and also to the industry where people don't even know how many are there. But we keep saying there are very few because the majority have come back home. And for me, I want to encourage the procurement officers of this country.
Wrap up, sir.
They have been doing a good job. They spend a lot of money, and they spend that under a lot of pressure, but the bulk of them deliver a good job, and they need to continue doing that irrespective of the pressure, because now we have seen if you break the law, that law will catch up with you one day.
I need to wrap up, sir. Thank you so much for your time, for speaking to us on The Big Story this evening. Engineer Chris Owanda, Chair, Kenya Institute of Supplies Management. We also had Professor George Wajakoya, who's a lawyer but well-versed with several issues bedeviling this country. A very big thank you as well to our lead reporter, Sophia Wanuna, who spoke to Opio Wandai, who's the Chair, Public Accounts Committee. It's also important to just reiterate Sophia's sentiment that we did try to get the voice of the government on this. We were unable to. We tried to reach out. We were unable to get anyone. That's where we wrap up The Big Story this evening. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Linda Ogutu.